Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often. The caustic smell of Tagar's iron-rich soil permeated the air, despite the filtration systems working overtime. Hozor Tevelis's sensory tendrils contracted at the acrid scent, registering subtle chemical changes that the mechanical filters couldn't catch. Another wave of bioweapons had been deployed somewhere in the eastern quadrant, the particles already working their way through the atmosphere. He'd been seeing the effects in patients within hours. Hozor adjusted the bindings, keeping his tendrils in their professional position at the back of his skull, then returned to calibrating the primitive diagnostic equipment. The forward medical outpost was a far cry from the state-of-the-art facilities where he'd trained. No neural interfaces, no virtual diagnostic displays, just manual equipment in a maze of tunnels carved into the rust-colored mesa, illuminated by strips of LED lighting that cast everything in an eerie blue-green glow. But primitive equipment was better than no equipment, especially when the nearest proper medical center was half a planet away.
Dr. Tevelis, incoming casualties,
called Rulal, the Galaxian medical technician. The tiny, grey-skinned being moved with surprising quickness despite his short limbs, already preparing the intake area for new arrivals. Hozor's faceted eyes adjusted instantly to the change in lighting as the outer doors cycled open. His broad-spectrum vision, one of the many evolutionary advantages of the Hovan species, allowed him to immediately assess the incoming patients. 3 new Dalvos with impact trauma, likely from building collapses, a Galaxian suffering from sulfur inhalation, lungs likely compromised, and "Human," he muttered, his gravelly voice carrying a note of concern that made Rulal glance up sharply. The Allied forces had only recently begun incorporating humans into their ranks. Terrans were still a novelty on the battlefield, their physiology an ongoing challenge for non-human medical personnel. Hozor had treated exactly 2 humans in his 15 cycles of service, and none had been in critical condition like this one appeared to be. "Female communications specialist," reported one of the soldiers carrying the stretcher. "First Lieutenant Maya Harrison, 6th Terrain Expeditionary Force, caught in the new bioweapon deployment. Respiratory distress began approximately 20 minutes ago." Hozor examined the human as they transferred her to the examination table. Lieutenant Harrison stood out even among her own kind, taller than average at 5'9", with skin a light brown shade covered in darker freckles, and black hair pulled back in a regulation bun, now coming loose. A scar ran from her left temple to her jaw, evidence of past combat experience. To Hozor's eyes, she looked unnervingly fragile, her limbs too long and thin, her frame lacking the density of most galactic species. Like all humans, she seemed almost breakable. And break she might. Purple lesions were already forming on her exposed skin, the telltale sign of the latest Yarmadir bioweapon, the one that had claimed dozens of Allied soldiers in the past week.
"Get me a full biological workup,"
Hozor ordered, his retractable claws extending from his fingertips as he prepared to cut clothes and take samples.
"And alert Commander Vulgaran." "The commander is overseeing the evacuation of critical patients to the secondary facility,"
Rulal replied, already attaching monitoring equipment to Harrison's arm.
"Shall I divert resources from the Dalvos casualties?"
Hozor hesitated. Allied medical protocol was clear. In resource-limited situations, triage priority went to species with established treatment protocols and higher survival rates. The Dalvos had documented 67% recovery rate from the current bioweapon with proper treatment. Humans? Unknown. There simply wasn't enough data. Before he could answer, the monitor began blaring an alarm. Harrison's oxygen saturation was plummeting.
"Begin standard anti-pathogen protocol,"
Hozor decided, injecting a broad-spectrum immune booster into Harrison's arm. His faceted eyes caught something unusual in her blood as it beaded around the injection site, a subtle difference in color compared to the other bioweapon victims he'd treated. "Something's different," he murmured, taking a sample and inserting it into the nearest analysis unit. While the primitive machine processed the sample, Hozor continued stabilizing the lieutenant. Her breathing was labored, the purple lesions spreading visibly across her skin. By all standard medical indicators, she should be deteriorating rapidly towards system failure. Yet, her heart rate, while elevated, had stabilized. Her neural activity showed normal stress patterns rather than the chaotic madness typically associated with the bioweapon's neurological effects. The analysis unit chimed. Hozor's tendrils stiffened in surprise as he read the results.
"What is it?"
Rulal asked, noticing his reaction.
"Her lymphatic system is responding. It's strange."
Hozor's voice carried an unusual curiosity, something between confusion and fascination.
"The pathogen isn't overwhelming her system like it does with other species. Her immune response is engaged."
It went against everything he'd been taught about normal interspecies medicine. Humans were newcomers to the galactic community, their physiology considered primitive compared to the more established species. Their medical technology was centuries behind most allied worlds. They required special accommodations, additional vaccinations, and specialized environments. In medical briefings, human soldiers were referred to as high-maintenance assets, valuable for their tactical abilities, but vulnerable to the countless threats that other species had evolved to withstand. Yet, here was evidence suggesting something entirely different.
"Run a comparative analysis against the other bioweapon cases,"
Hozor instructed, his professional detachment giving way to scientific curiosity.
"And get me everything we have on human immunology."
The outpost shook as an explosion rocked the surface above them. Dust sifted down from the ceiling of the cavern. "The Yarmadira are advancing on our position," called a voice from the communications station. "Command expects they'll reach the outpost perimeter within 2 hours. Evacuation protocol is now in effect." Amidst the sudden increase in activity, Commander Vogaran entered the triage area. The Dalvos officer's ash-white skin seemed to glow under the blue-green lights, his 6 eyes taking in the scene with military stiffness. At nearly 7 feet tall, his gaunt frame towered over both Hozor and Rulal. "Report," he demanded, his voice as methodical as his movements.
3 Dalvos with impact trauma, 1 Galaxian with sulfur exposure, and a human with bioweapon contamination,"
Hozor stated, listing Harrison last, knowing Vogaran's views on resource allocation. As expected, the commander's attention fixed immediately on the Dalvos casualties. "Stabilize our people first. The evacuation shuttles will reach the secondary landing zone in 90 minutes. Priority patients must be ready for transport."
"Sir,"
Hozor said, stepping forward slightly,
"the human is showing an unusual response to the bioweapon. I believe she will—"
"I'm familiar with the standard deterioration pattern, Doctor," Vogaran interrupted, not even glancing at Harrison. "We've lost 17 allied personnel to this pathogen already. Standard protocol applies." Standard protocol meant palliative care only for cases with less than 40% survival probability during emergency evacuations. Resources would be directed to higher probability survivors.
"With respect, Commander, this case is different,"
Hozor persisted.
"Lieutenant Harrison's immune system appears to be actively combating the pathogen. If we can understand how—"
"We are at war, Dr. Tevelis," Vogaran said coldly, his 6 eyes finally turning to regard Hozor directly. Your scientific drive is noted, but irrelevant in our current tactical situation. The human will be made comfortable and evacuated if the situation permits. Focus all your attention on patients you can actually save.
But, sir, if we could develop a countermeasure based on...
That's an order, Doctor. Vogaran's tone left no room for argument. 86 personnel require evacuation with limited medical transport capacity. This human is not a priority. As Vogaran moved away to inspect the Dalvos casualties, Hozor returned to Harrison's side. Her condition had stabilized, though the purple lesions continued their steady spread. The initial diagnostic had completed, displaying results that contradicted everything Hozor had been taught about human physiology.
"What are you doing that others can't?"
he murmured, studying the readouts more carefully. A hand weakly grasped his arm. Harrison's eyes had opened, glazed with fever but conscious.
"Am I dying, Doc?"
she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hozor hesitated. Honesty was his typical policy with patients, but the truth was he wasn't certain anymore. By all standard medical protocols, she should be deteriorating faster than she was.
"You've been exposed to the Yarmadir bioweapon," he explained. "Your body is fighting it."
A ghost of a smile crossed her lips.
"We're good at that. Fighting things we shouldn't be able to beat."
Before Hozor could respond, Harrison's body convulsed, her back arching off the examination table. The monitoring equipment erupted in alarms as her oxygen levels crashed.
"Respiratory support,"
Hozor called to Rolal, who was already moving toward them with emergency equipment. Together, they stabilized Harrison again, but Hozor could see the progression of the pathogen through her system. The purple lesions had spread further, yet still showed defined borders, unusual for this bioweapon, which typically kept expanding. A decision crystallized in Hozor's mind. 15 cycles of military service had taught him to respect the chain of command, but his medical oath predated his commission. Sometimes saving lives required breaking rules.
"Rolal,"
he said quietly, ensuring no one else could hear.
"Prepare isolation chamber 3. We're moving the lieutenant there now."
The Calaxian's eyes widened.
"But Commander Vogaran's orders." "I'll handle the commander. Lieutenant Harrison isn't just another casualty. She could be the key to developing a countermeasure," Hozor said. "I'm not letting her die when her body is showing us something we've never seen before." As they carefully transferred Harrison to a transport gurney, another explosion rocked the outpost. Closer this time, the lights flickered momentarily. "The Yarmadir have breached the outer defense line," announced a harried communications officer. "Evacuation timeline has been accelerated. All personnel prepare for immediate withdrawal."
Commander Vogaran reappeared, his movements now more hurried, though still controlled. All critical Dalvos and Galaxian casualties to Transport Bay 1, remaining patients to Transport Bay 2 as space allows. His 6 eyes narrowed as he noticed Hozor and Rolal moving Harrison. Dr. Tevelis, did I not make myself clear? Non-priority cases remain here until all critical allied species are evacuated. Hozor straightened to his full height, still a foot shorter than the commander, but unwavering.
"With respect, sir, I believe Lieutenant Harrison represents a critical research opportunity that could save countless allied lives. I'm transferring her to isolation for continued observation."
"We're abandoning this position, Doctor. There will be no continued observation."
"Then I'll remain with her until the second evacuation wave,"
Hozor stated firmly.
The lieutenant's immune system could be the breakthrough we need against the Yamadir bioweapons. I cannot in good conscience abandon this line of research."
Vogaran's expression hardened. "Would you risk your life for a single human, a species that barely belongs in this conflict?"
"I would risk my life for anyone if that meant a chance to get a cure for those weapons," Hozor countered. "And right now, understanding what's happening in Lieutenant Harrison's body may be our best chance of doing that."
For a moment it seemed Vogaran would physically stop them. Then another explosion shook the outpost, decisive and close enough to dislodge fragments from the ceiling. "On your head be it, Doctor," the commander said coldly. "When this human dies despite your efforts, as they all do, I will personally ensure your medical license is revoked if you survive long enough to face the consequences of your insubordination." Without waiting for a response, Vogaran turned and strode away, barking orders to prepare the primary evacuation transports.
"Are you certain about this?"
Ralal asked nervously as they continued toward the isolation chamber.
"The commander isn't known for idle threats."
Hozor watched Harrison's face, the purple lesions stark against her brown skin, her breathing labored but fighting. Something about humans had allowed them to survive on their hostile homeworld without the advanced medical technology other species required. Something his people, for all their scientific advancement, had never fully understood.
"I'm certain,"
he said, his faceted eyes reflecting the blue-green emergency lights as they descended deeper into the outpost.
"One way or another, Lieutenant Harrison is going to teach us something important about this weapon."
Above them, the battle for the eastern quadrant of Tagar raged on, but in the depths of the medical outpost, a different kind of battle was beginning, one that perhaps would challenge everything the galactic medical community thought they knew about the resilience of humanity. 36 hours had passed since Hozor had defied Commander Vogaran's direct orders. 36 hours of continuous monitoring, minimal sleep, and mounting anxiety as the battle raged closer to their position. The isolation chamber, originally a storage vault hastily repurposed for quarantine cases, had become Hozor's entire world. Its raw, unfinished stone walls, reinforced with creaking durasteel supports, felt both like a sanctuary and a prison. The air recyclers struggled against the perpetual mineral dust, leaving the atmosphere slightly stale despite their best efforts. Low-powered emergency strips provide the only illumination, casting harsh shadows across Lieutenant Harrison's unconscious form. The portable diagnostic units and ventilators vibrated in the background, occasionally competing with the annoyance of the distant sound of explosions from the battle above. Hozor's sensory tendrils hung limply around his shoulders, dried out from stress and lack of proper care. His normally green skin had taken on an ashen pallor. He'd been documenting everything with obsessive detail, recording every fluctuation in Harrison's condition with the grim knowledge that these notes might soon serve as evidence in his court-martial, if any of them survived long enough for that to matter.
"You should rest,"
said Ralal, entering the chamber with a small container of nutrient paste. The Galaxian had been smuggling extra supplies to the isolation chamber during shift changes, risking his own career to support Hozor's unorthodox decision.
"I can monitor her for a few hours."
"No need," Hozor replied, his voice rougher than usual from fatigue.
"Something's changing."
He gestured toward the diagnostic display. For the past day and a half, Lieutenant Harrison had remained in critical condition, her body waging what appeared to be a losing battle against the Yamadir pathogen. The purple lesions had spread across much of her exposed skin, and her breathing remained labored despite respiratory support. By all standard medical indicators, she should have died hours ago. Yet, she hadn't.
"Her white blood cell count,"
Ralal observed, leaning closer to the display.
"It's increasing." "Not just increasing," Hozor corrected, a hint of excitement breaking through his exhaustion. Look at the cell morphology. They're changing to better fight the pathogen. That's impossible, Rolal whispered. No species can alter immune response so quickly.
Hozor's faceted eyes reflected the blue light of the monitor.
Apparently humans can.
Suddenly, the door to the observation room slid open, revealing Commander Vogaran's tall, gaunt silhouette. The Dalvos officer had made only periodic appearances at the observation window over the past day, each time documenting what he clearly expected to be Hozor's professional failure. "I see the human still lives," Vogaran noted, his tone suggesting this was merely a temporary state, though lives may be a generous assessment.
Her condition is stabilizing,
Hozor reported, straightening his posture despite his fatigue.
The pathogen spread has slowed, and her immune response is intensifying.
All six of Vogaran's eyes narrowed slightly. Temporary fluctuations before terminal decline. We've seen it before with this bioweapon.
Not like this,
Hozor insisted, gesturing toward the detailed cellular analysis.
Look at these markers. Her lymphocytes are producing specific antibodies against the pathogen. The lesions have stopped expanding and are showing defined borders. This isn't terminal decline. It's a war and she's winning.
Before Vogaran could dismiss his observations again, the communications panel on the wall chimed.
Medical Outpost Eastern Quadrant. This is Dr. Jones, xenobiologist, 4th Terran Expeditionary Force, requesting update on Lieutenant Harrison's condition.
Hozor activated the comms.
Dr. Jones, this is Medical Officer Tevelis. The lieutenant is critical but stabilizing. Are you familiar with your species' response to pathogenic invasion?
That's precisely why I'm calling, replied Jones. Command informed me of the situation. I'd like to consult her on case.
Vogaran stepped forward. This facility is under evacuation orders, Doctor. We don't have resources for consultations.
With respect, Commander,
Jones countered.
If you have a human officer surviving exposure to the new Yarmadir bioweapon, that information is my problem. I'm en route to your position now.
The upper access points have been compromised, Vogaran stated flatly. Arrival is inadvisable.
I'm already at your secondary entrance, Commander. Eastern Maintenance Shaft. Your security officer is verifying my credentials now.
Vogaran's expression darkened, but he merely turned to Hozor and said, You have until the final evacuation transport departs, not a moment longer. He left the observation room without waiting for acknowledgement. 4 hours later, Hozor found himself explaining his treatment approach to Dr. Jones, a compact human with white skin and close-cropped grey hair. The xenobiologist walked with a slight limp as he circled Harrison's bed, examining the lesions with interest.
So, you administered only supportive care?
Jones asked, reviewing Hozor's detailed notes.
No anti-pathogen treatments?
Standard protocols would have suppressed her immune response, Hozor explained. Something about her body's reaction seemed purposeful. I didn't want to interfere.
Jones nodded slowly.
You made the right call, though I suspect you'll catch hell for it from your command structure.
You don't seem surprised by her condition, Hozor observed.
I'm not,
Jones confirmed with a small smile.
What you're witnessing is a fairly standard human immune response to a novel pathogen.
Hozor tendrils switched in disbelief.
Standard? She nearly died.
Nearly being the operative word,
Jones replied, tapping the diagnostic display.
Humans evolved on a planet filled with diseases, millions of them. Our immune systems had to become extremely adaptable just for our species to survive. What looks like system failure to your eyes It's actually an aggressive adaptive response.
He pointed to the lesions on Harrison's arm.
If that's true, then her body is isolating the infection, preventing further spread while generating targeted antibodies.
Hozor stared at the human physician, his world view shifting.
Could her blood be used to develop treatments for others?
Hozor asked, mind racing with possibilities.
Potentially,
Jones said,
though cross-species applications would be complex.
He studied Hozor for a moment.
You risked your career to treat her, didn't you?
Before Hozor could respond, the whole facility shook violently. Emergency lights switched to red, and the evacuation alert began blaring through the comm system.
Perimeter breach,
announced a voice over the facility-wide channel.
All personnel to evacuation points immediately. Yarmadir forces have penetrated to level 3. That's directly above us,
Rolal said, fear evident in his voice. The isolation chamber door slid open, and Commander Vogaran entered again, his normally immaculate uniform now torn and stained. Final evacuation in 15 minutes. Transport Bay 3. Bring only essential medical data. His 6 eyes fixed on the human female. I presume the human experiment has concluded. As if to mock Vogaran, a groan from the bed drew everyone's attention. Lieutenant Harrison's eyes fluttered open, fever-glazed but conscious. She tried to speak, producing only a dry rasp. Rolal quickly offered her water, supporting her head as she drank.
Evac?
She managed after a moment, her crisis mode immediately asserting itself despite her condition.
Yes,
Hozor confirmed, moving to check her vitals.
Can you move?
Give me a minute, she whispered, attempting to sit up before falling back, clearly too weak to support herself. Another explosion rocked the facility, closer this time. Dust and small fragments of stone rained from the ceiling.
She needs a stretcher,
Jones stated flatly.
I'll help carry her.
Vogaran's expression hardened. We have critically injured Chauvin personnel who require transport assistance. The human can walk or remain behind.
She can't walk,
Hozor protested.
And her blood contains antibodies that could save countless allied lives. She's a medical asset now.
The Yarmadir have deployed a neurological agent specifically targeting Chauvins, Vogaran countered. My people are dying while you obsess over one human soldier. The facility shook again, harder this time, and the lights flickered ominously.
I can walk,
Harrison insisted, forcing herself upright with visible effort. Her face had paled considerably, but determination burned in her eyes.
Just need support.
Jones moved to her side immediately, sliding an arm around her waist.
Lean on me, Lieutenant. We'll move together.
Hozor felt torn between his duty to his own species and his commitment to Harrison's treatment. The neurological agent Vogaran mentioned was real. 3 Chauvin medical staff had collapsed in the past hour, their nervous systems under attack. Dr. Tevelis, Vogaran said, his voice cold with command authority. Your expertise is required for our Chauvin casualties. Dr. Jones can attend to Lieutenant Harrison.
I need to document her recovery properly, Hozor argued. We can't lose this data.
My orders are not suggestions, Doctor, Vogaran snapped. Choose now your career, your people, or this human experiment. Before Hozor could respond, Harrison locked eyes with him. Go, she said weakly. Your people need you. I'll be fine. Despite her condition, she managed a faint smile. Humans are surprisingly hard to kill. The decision crystallized in Hozor's mind.
Rolal, transfer all of Lieutenant Harrison's medical data to my personal unit. Dr. Jones, ensure she reaches evacuation transport.
He turned to Vogaran.
I'll attend to the Chauvin casualties immediately, sir.
The commander's expression remained cold, but he nodded curtly before turning to leave. As they prepared to evacuate, another violent explosion shook the outpost. The lights failed completely for several seconds before emergency power engaged.
That was the main power generator,
Ralal reported grimly.
We're on reserves now.
The comms system crackled. All personnel, be advised. Yarmadir forces have breached Level 4. Evacuation route to Transport Bay 3 is compromised. Divert to maintenance tunnels and proceed to the secondary extraction point. Hozor felt a moment of dread. The maintenance tunnels were narrow, winding passages originally used by Tagar's native subterranean species. Moving injured personnel through them would be challenging at best, impossible at worst.
Change of plans, he announced, making a swift decision. Ralal, help Dr. Jones with Lieutenant Harrison. Take the eastern tunnel branch. It's wider and more direct to the extraction point. What about you? Ralal asked. I'll take the Chauvin casualties through the northern branch. It's longer but should accommodate stretchers. We'll meet at the extraction point.
Harrison reached out, grasping Hozor's arm with surprising strength given her condition. Thank you, she said simply, for seeing what others missed. Hozor's faceted eyes met hers.
I believe the lesson is that we've underestimated humans all along. Perhaps what your species lacks in technology, you make up for in biology.
Don't sell yourself short, Doc, she replied with a weak smile. Takes a good doctor to know when to get out of the way and let nature work. As they parted at the tunnel entrance, Hozor realized his perception had fundamentally shifted. He had always viewed humans as fragile newcomers to galactic warfare, requiring advanced alien medicine to survive. Now, he understood something profound. Sometimes surviving didn't require technological advancement, but rather the hard-won adaptations forged through millennia of struggle against a hostile environment. The question now was whether they would all live long enough to put this knowledge to use. The maintenance tunnels beneath the medical outpost were a labyrinth of narrow passages, barely tall enough for Hozor to stand upright. Bioluminescent fungi clung to the rough stone walls, casting everything in an eerie blue glow that made medical work nearly impossible. The geometric patterns carved by Tagar's native species covered the tunnel surfaces, silent witnesses to a civilization that had thrived here before the war. Hozor led his group of 7 Chauvin patients, each suffering from neurological bioweapon. Their symptoms were progressing rapidly: tremors, visual distortions, coordination loss. Unlike the human, their recovery would be slow. The Yarmadir had designed this agent not to kill fast, but to debilitate. A crueler fate for a species that prided itself on precise movement and sensory acuity.
Rest here,
Hozor instructed as they reached a wider chamber that appeared to have once been a communal gathering space. Stone benches arranged in precise circular patterns provided places for the patients to sit while he checked their conditions. A distant rumble echoed through the tunnels, another section of the outpost collapsing above them. Time was running short.
"Can you help them?"
asked one of the walking wounded, a junior medical officer whose tendrils were already showing signs of nerve damage, trembling uncontrollably. Hozor administered another round of stabilizing agents, but the truth was grim.
"These treatments are only buying time. We need proper medical facilities."
As he worked, his mind kept returning to Lieutenant Harrison and what her immune response might mean for future bioweapon countermeasures, if they could isolate the adaptive properties of human immunity. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps from a connecting tunnel. Hozor tensed, reaching for his sidearm, but relaxed when he saw Ralal's familiar stocky silhouette emerge from the darkness.
"You should be halfway to the extraction point by now," Hozor said, surprised.
"Change of plans,"
the Galaxian replied grimly.
"The eastern tunnel collapsed about 200 meters in. We had to double back. Dr. Jones and Lieutenant Harrison are just behind me.
Moments later, Jones appeared, still supporting Harrison, who looked pale but remarkably alert compared to her condition just hours earlier.
The extraction team reported Yarmouth forces approaching the secondary point,
Jones explained without preamble.
They've delayed departure as long as possible, but we have less than 30 minutes to reach them.
These patients can't move that quickly,
Hozor replied, gesturing to the Chauvins, several of whom were now showing advanced neurological symptoms. Harrison detached herself from Jones's support, wobbling slightly but standing under her own power. The purple lesions had already begun to fade to bruise-like marks. "Then we carry them," she said simply. Before Hozor could respond, another figure emerged from the tunnel behind them, Commander Vogaran. His uniform was now torn in multiple places, and a gash across his ash-white skin leaked greenish fluid. His 6 eyes darted around the chamber, taking in the assembled group.
"Commander?"
Hozor acknowledged with surprise.
"I thought you were evacuated with the main medical staff."
"The transport was compromised," Vogaran replied tersely. "I've been trying to reach the secondary extraction point through these insufferable tunnels." Something in his tone made Hozor uneasy. The commander appeared more agitated than the situation warranted, his normally measured movements now jerky and impatient.
"We're heading there now," Hozor offered. "You're welcome to join us."
Vogaran's attention was fixed on the Chauvin patients. "These are all that remain of our medical division? Pathetic." He turned to the non-Chauvin patients, 3 Galaxians and a Hrumar who had joined their group along the way. "You 4 appear ambulatory. You will assist me in reaching the extraction point immediately." The Hrumar, an elderly civilian with bright scales, looked confused.
"But we're all going together, aren't we?"
"You will come with me now and help," Vogaran repeated, his voice hardening. "The extraction team won't wait indefinitely, and I won't be delayed by these." He gestured dismissively at the Chauvin patients. "Lost causes."
"These lost causes are your colleagues," Hozor said sharply. "Allied medical personnel who've treated countless patients, including your own species."
"And now their liabilities," Vogaran countered coldly. "The neurological agent is irreversible with our current field capabilities. Even if they reach the extraction point in time, they won't recover fully. They'll never practice medicine again. Their careers are over." One of the Galaxian patients stepped forward.
"We're not abandoning anyone, Commander. We move together or not at all."
Vogaran's expression darkened. "I'm still the ranking officer here. You will follow my orders."
"Actually, sir," Harrison said, her voice stronger than before, "in an evacuation scenario, medical officers have authority over patient movement. It's Section 47B of Allied Forces Protocol." Vogaran's eyes fixed on her with undisguised contempt. "You barely qualify as a patient, Lieutenant, much less an authority on Allied protocol."
"She's right, though,"
Jones confirmed.
"Dr. Tevelis has command authority here."
The commander's posture shifted subtly, becoming more threatening. "I've indulged in this insubordination long enough. The humans should have died days ago according to every medical precedent. Instead, Dr. Tevelis wasted critical resources on an experiment while our people, my people, suffered."
"Understanding human nature healing could save countless lives," Hozor countered. "Lieutenant Harrison's immune response—"
"It's irrelevant," Vogaran snapped. "Humans are an evolutionary aberration, a primitive species that should never have been allowed into the Allied forces. Their biological unpredictability makes them dangerous, not valuable. The Hrumar patient stepped back, visibly alarmed by Vogaran's outburst.
Commander, you're not well.
I'm perfectly well, Vogaran hissed. I am the only one here thinking clearly. The Chauvin patients are lost. The human is an anomaly that should be studied in a proper facility, not coddled by a doctor who's forgotten his primary loyalty. Hozor noticed something disturbing, a faint violet tinge appearing at the edges of Vogaran's 6 eyes, a symptom he recognized immediately.
Commander, he said carefully, when were you exposed to the bioweapon?
Vogaran stiffened. I wasn't.
You're showing early signs of neurological contamination, Hozor persisted. The violet discoloration around your eyes?
Enough, Vogaran shouted, reaching for his sidearm. I will not be diagnosed by a traitor to his own species. You four, he gestured to the Galaxians and the Hrumar, come with me now, or I will leave you all behind. The patients exchanged glances. Then the Hrumar stepped forward.
No!
What did you say? Vogaran's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper.
I said no,
the elderly Hrumar repeated, his scales shifting color slightly with emotion.
You would abandon injured colleagues. You speak of other species with contempt. You threaten patients with a weapon.
The Hrumar straightened to his full height.
It seems to me that you want to use us to reach the extraction point sooner, so you can save yourself.
Before Vogaran could respond, there was a swift movement from the side. Lieutenant Harrison, despite her weakened state, had positioned herself between the commander and the patients, her stance unmistakably protective. "Lower your weapon, Commander," she ordered, her military tone evident in her unwavering voice. Though unarmed and still recovering, she stood with the confidence of someone who had faced worse odds. The Galaxians and the other patients moved behind her, forming a unified front. Harrison's eyes never left Vogaran's weapon hand, her body tensed and ready to act if necessary.
"Stand aside, Lieutenant,"
Vogaran hissed, but there was a new hesitation in his voice. "No, sir," Harrison replied firmly. "These people have chosen to stay together. You're welcome to join us, but you will not threaten patients under my protection." Vogaran's gaze swept the chamber, finding himself facing not just opposition but a human soldier ready to defend the others despite her recent brush with death. "You've turned them against me," he said to Hozor, voice tight with fury. "You and that human."
"No one has turned anyone against you,"
Hozor replied evenly and then gestured to the violet tinge around Vogaran's eyes.
"And you need medical attention. The neurological agent is affecting your judgment."
"My judgment is perfect," Vogaran snarled. He backed toward one of the tunnel entrances. "You've made your choice. I'll reach the extraction point myself."
"That tunnel leads deeper into the Mesa,"
Ralal warned.
"The extraction point is—"
"I don't need directions from a Galaxian technician." Vogaran cut him off. With a final venomous glare, he disappeared into the darkness of the wrong tunnel. A heavy silence fell over the chamber.
"Should we go after him?"
Ralal asked with uncertainty. Hozor hesitated, torn between his duty as a doctor and the needs of the patients already in his care.
"He's chosen his path. We need to focus on reaching the extraction point with these patients."
"He's infected," Harrison observed quietly. "The bioweapon is affecting his mind."
"Yes,"
Hozor confirmed.
"He is not a human. His condition will deteriorate rapidly.
A tremor ran through the tunnels, another section of the outpost collapsing.
We need to move, Jones urged. The extraction team won't wait forever.
With renewed urgency, they organized the Chauvin patients for transport, the strongest members of the group constructing makeshift stretchers from materials found in the abandoned chambers. Harrison, despite her own weakened condition, insisted on helping carry one end of a stretcher. As they moved through the tunnels, Hozor found himself walking alongside Harrison.
"In all my years of medicine," he said quietly, "I've never seen anything like your recovery."
She managed a tired smile. If we've learned anything as a species, it's how to survive things that should kill us.
"The Alliance has always viewed humans as medically fragile," Hozor admitted. "Your shorter lifespans, your susceptibility to radiation, your need for specific atmospheric conditions."
"Yet here I am," she replied, "walking after exposure to a bioweapon that killed dozens of Allied soldiers." Before Hozor could respond, their forward scout called back,
"I see a light ahead. It's the extraction point."
Relief washed through the group, giving renewed energy to their final push. As they emerged into an ancient loading bay now open to the surface, Hozor saw the welcome sight of an Allied transport vessel waiting on the platform, its engines already running.
"Cutting it close, Doctor," called the pilot. "We've got Yamadir units covering on this position. 5 minutes and we're dust."
They quickly loaded the patients into the transport. As Hozor helped secure the last stretcher, he glanced back at the tunnel entrance, feeling a pang of guilt about Vogaran despite everything. "He made his choice," Harrison said softly, reading his thoughts. The transport lifted off just as the first Yamadir scouts appeared on the ridge above them. As they accelerated away from Tagar's surface, Hozor watched the rust-colored landscape recede, knowing that nothing in his medical career would ever be the same. "What happens now?" Harrison asked as a medic checked her vital signs. Hozor's tendrils curled thoughtfully.
"Now the real work begins. Your immune response may hold the key to countering the Yamadir bioweapons."
As the tunnel entrance turned small in the distance, she replied, "Ironic, isn't it? You've been trying to protect us with your technology when, all along, the solution was in our primitive biology. Sometimes the best teacher is nature itself."